men and women. So the military draft is considered the Selective Service Act. This law that was passed by Congress in 1917 was created the national draft, requiring all men ages 18 to 25 to register for military service. This was the first time that the U.S. government had established a draft before entering into a war. The United States has not utilized the draft since 1973 during the Vietnam War. At this time, the draft came to an end when the armed forces moved to an all-volunteer military force. However, the Selective Service Act was and is still limited to only men because women were not serving in combat roles. Women's role in the military has been changing. Back in 1775, women were only able to follow their husbands into war as cooks or nurses with the permission of the commanding officers. Their presence also needed to have been deemed necessary and helpful to war and not just to accompany their men into combat. In 1917, Loretta Walsh was the first woman to enlist, and by 1976, the first group of women were admitted into the U.S. Military Academy. The Obama administration lifted a ban for women in combat roles in December of 2015, but this did not include an amendment or a change to the Selective Service Law. The ban on women in specialties such as armor, artillery, and infantry dates back all the way to 1994. So why is Congress not yet to reinstate a military draft to include 18-year-old men and women? It has been recommended by commandment of the Marine Corps and the Army Chief of Staff to include women in the registration, and it has been introduced, but it hasn't made it past approval in Congress. The military draft. Some concerns include the fact that we are automatically going to be sending our young daughters into war. Basically, the draft was the United States contingency plan. The draft, as not all military occupations involve combat if the draft was to be implemented. Worst case scenario, we're asking our young women to do what is asked and required for our young men to serve our country and be drafted in the event of a national emergency. The late Senator John McCain said, "The fact is that every single leader in this country, both men and women, members of the military leadership, believe that it's fair, since we opened up all aspects of the military to women, that we would also be registering them for selective services." This indeed was the very reason that women were not required in the first place, because they didn't serve in combat roles, so how could we make them register for selective services? But those times have changed since then. Equality. Women are always, we hear often that women want to be equal to men. Despite the increase of women's roles of those currently serving within the military today, the draft for selective service law is limited to only men still. We hear often women want to be equal to men because equal means sharing the burdens as well as the opportunities with men. In fact, the exact definition of equality in the dictionary says, "It is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. There is no mention of a person's gender inequality. It is only fair that the same standard should be required and upheld by our young women also as it is our young men." One can make the argument that just as the argument was made to allow women to serve side by side our men in the United States Armed Forces, they should be required to sign for selective service registration, therefore showing true gender-neutral equality of women to men. The same argument can be made for our young men as well, that not every American is running to enlist into a voluntary branch of military, but our 18-year-old young men are required to register for selective services in order to avoid consequences of violation of a law. And it's only fair that the same standards should be required of our young women also. Nora Benschau, a military police analyst at the American University School of International Service, reported in a New York Times article, "Whether in this debate or through the courts, it just seems now that you have women allowed to serve in any position in the military, there is no logical basis to say that women should not be drafted also." I want to thank y'all for your time, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.